It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 47. In fact, we've been doing it a lot longer than this, but this is the show where we combine all matters, politics and media in Australia with a good, solid look around the rest of the world, see what's going on there. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack. And
g'day.
I can't believe it, but you're on another public holiday.
Well, it was yesterday. This has been
on the Sunday?
On the Tuesday. No, this has been recorded on the
sorry,
Tuesday.
hang on. Yeah, look, I'm all over the shop because we had a public holiday, of course, yesterday.
Yeah. It's actually the first is the day, is National Day. It's the National Day, not from Hong Kong, because we're not a nation.
That's right.
We're just a city.
We're a protectorate.
It's the National Day for the People's Republic of China, celebrating the commencement of the People's Republic back in 1949.
The Long March.
And because that's fixed by the Gregorian calendar and the Mid-Autumn Festival, which happened on Friday and Saturday, is a lunar festival, we occasionally get this congregation where there are two public holidays and a Sunday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday off. And that means that all 350,000 foreign domestic helpers in Hong Kong get 3 days holiday in a row.
Mm. So there'll be a fair amount of activity at the airport, Jack.
Well, the two things that happen about this. First of all, people get very upset because they've got to look after their own kids and clean their own house. This coincidence only happens occasionally. It happened the first year we were here, and I was most amused to read a very cross letter in the South China Morning Post from a woman who said that the Department of Health and Hygiene should intervene because it was very unhygienic for people's flats not to be cleaned for 3 days while domestic helpers were on leave. Anyone
think to show how to use a vacuum cleaner?
Yeah, I don't think. Well, the vacuum cleaners aren't all that common here because almost no one has carpet. But that's what greatly amused. And, of course, having to look after your own kids for 3 days is difficult because I think there's an ordinance that says you can't cook 2 meals a day for your own kids without assistance. Almost 1 million Hong Kongers have hopped on the plane and gone off to Thailand and Bali, and
is there anyone left there, Jack?
Well, there's almost as many mainlanders have arrived because it's what they call Golden Week in China. So most of the population get a week off. So everyone goes travelling. So the first time we really had a big influx of mainland tourists since pre-COVID, but noticeable on the streets. There were very few locals, but lots of people doing what passes for travel these days, walking around in pairs, taking photos of each other with their phones.
Oh, very nice. And I did see in 2018, Hong Kong recorded 3.4 million arrivals over that Golden Week holiday, Jack.
Yep.
It wouldn't be quite as high this time.
No, we used to get about 20 million mainland arrivals a year.
And 3.4 of them basically, what are we
in
talking?
1 week. Yeah.
In 1 week, yeah.
Yeah. That was, of course, a huge fillip to the economy, and we've been missing that for the last 3 or 4 years.
Get a little bit of a sugar hit, but not as much as the pre-pandemic phase, Jack.
The green shoots of recovery, we hope.
Green shoots. Now, there's another cliche that belongs up there with polarisation.
I know. It's a little bit better than that.
Oh, green shoots pretty bad, mate. It's pretty bad. All right. Now, we've got to move on to matters Australian. Enjoy your public holiday and roll around a bit of your own filth there, Jack, while the cleaner's away.
Can I just add? We have someone who comes in part time to do a little bit of the stuff that I don't feel like doing, but we don't have a live-in domestic help.
All right. Now you want to look at some of the matters arising from the voice. And I see here, if the voice is a simple advisory body, why does it need a whole separate chapter in the Constitution? I had a very similar civil conversation, with a person in my DMs on Twitter about this. If the voice is a simple advisory body, why does it need a whole separate chapter in the Constitution? Why not put it in the executive chapter, making it clear to a future High Court that it is subordinate to Parliament?
This is the most common question I get asked on text messaging.
The one that I got asked was, why not legislate the voice and then implement it by referendum thereafter, after it had been bedded down for perhaps 5 years? So
that was Bill Shorten's position in the 2019 election, I think.
Right. So is this Albo's overreach with this? Is that the question, that perhaps we should have bedded it down? The argument, of course, is that if you don't enshrine it in the Constitution, or if you put it in the executive chapter, it can't be wiped out. But the argument is, if you don't put it in the Constitution, a subsequent government at some point in the future could come along and wipe it out, a la Ratsick all those years ago, Jack. But if it goes into the executive chapter, rather than a separate chapter of its own, which will be legislated beyond the referendum, if the referendum succeeds. Is that you're getting actual questions on that?
Yeah, people are asking. I've had quite a few texts about that.
Okay, so what's your answer?
That would be better than giving it its own chapter. Giving it its own chapter invites the High Court to treat it as an equal with the courts and the executive and the Parliament.
I'm not sure how that works in terms of interpreting the Constitution, Jack, and the High Court. And
the honest answer to that is nobody knows.
Well, the answer to it is the High Court would interpret it as not as a separate chapter, but what lies therein in terms of, whether it's a separate chapter or not seems to me to be fairly irrelevant. It's basically how the black letter words hit the page of the Constitution.
I don't think the High Court would agree with you that there is no distinction in having its own chapter.
Well, what's the difference?
Because it rises in status by having its own chapter.
I'm not sure that I understand how it can. But we'll move on because we're talking about some political consequences. Dennis Shanahan wrote a piece in The Australian.
Just before we go on from there, the other question I keep getting asked on text messages from Australia is, if the idea of the voice is to address disadvantage in the Aboriginal community, Indigenous community, and particularly in remote communities, and they believe, and the proponents believe that it's going to fix it, why would you make it permanent by putting it in the Constitution? Surely you would do this when it fixes that disadvantage. You'd shut it down.
When it fixes that disadvantage. So, first thing, acknowledging that it will fix disadvantage. Second thing, we've got a very, very long way to go in terms of bridging the gap.
These people aren't acknowledging that at all. They're saying if the proponents say it's going to fix the disadvantage, and the onus is always on the proponents in a referendum. The onus is not on the no case. The onus is on the yes case. If the proponents believe that it's going to fix that disadvantage, then why do they want to make it permanent?
Well, I would think it's going to take a fair while, Jack. I mean, I think maybe
but a fair while, it's not
maybe not forever. But it does, of course. Why it fundamentally wants to be listed, why the government will legislate in the Parliament to insert the voice into the Constitution. The answer to that is that subsequent governments, if it's not constitutionally enshrined will come along and get rid of it because, due to political expedience or whatever reason, they will just legislate it out. So that's the reason why it has to be enshrined in the Constitution. Otherwise, it will become subject to, the sort of normal to and fro and cut and thrust of politics.
Yeah, that's not an answer that's convincing people at the moment, I don't think.
Well, you only really need to look at the history of this before, why Howard killed Atzik. And that was highly controversial, of course, at the time. There were lots of accusations of fraud
Killing Atzik wasn't controversial. Killing Atzik had wide support across the political spectrum. Atzik was controversial.
Atzik, there were a number of charges, there were a number of accusations made about individual members of Atzik, Jack. Were any of them ever charged?
Yeah, I think the bloke from Western Victoria was charged in the end.
What was he charged with?
Don't know. Can't remember.
Okay.
Jeff
So
Clark.
it was a long time ago, but at the time, part of the conservative media was saying this doesn't work because it's been defrauded. And you might remember Sugar Ray Robinson and a few others, and the bloke from Western Victoria. I know who you mean.
Jeff Clark.
But I believe that was a separate matter, wasn't it? Not so much misuse of funds.
No, he's had two battles in the court. I think two separate ones. One involved Atzik and one involved some other issues.
Dennis Shanahan wrote a piece, I introed that just a few minutes ago, that Albanese is refining a new political narrative aimed at minimising culpability for his misjudgment and maximising blame for Peter Dutton. That's an op-ed and a half there, right? Just it's a sentence, an op-ed sentence and a half right there, Jack, now we've got a vote being cast, but when this was written, there hadn't been. And it basically, the op-ed went on to say that basically there will be some political fallout. Albo's trying to manipulate it, so the hard word will come on to Peter Dutton. Do you buy any of that, Jack?
I think he's fairly right about the tactic, and I think there'll be a lot of politics played with that. My view is the question I ask is, would actually getting Peter Dutton's support have made any difference to what's a likely result? And I think the answer to that's no.
Okay. Well, yeah, that sits in the realms of speculation because, of course, Peter Dutton and the coalition, well, certainly the National Party went first in promoting the no case, and then the Liberal Party under Peter Dutton has, or shall we say the opposition front bench, shall we say the Liberal front bench has, because there are a number of members, parliamentary members of the Liberal Party who are out there fighting for the yes case, Jack.
Yeah. What does Costamara say? I think he estimated that, this is the Redbridge fella, that there are 2 million Labor voters who are going to vote no.
2,400,000 Green voters, Jack, which is a staggering sort of number on his estimates. He also did some sort of breakdowns, age breakdowns, and the only group that supports that has the majority support for the yes case are Gen Zers, Jack.
Yeah. Where did this go wrong? And it's likely to go wrong. These sort of conversations that we just had about what we think is right and wrong about the process, about the proposal, they should have been had before the proposal was put, and they weren't.
Fair enough. Okay.
That's on the government. That's on help, and not just on the government. I suspect it's on the Prime Minister, because I think he drove this. This is a captain's pick.
Well, I think we go back to the comments that he made around the death of Yunupingu, where he said that he had promised Yunupingu that he wouldn't water this down prior to Yunupingu's death, Jack. You might remember those remarks.
Yeah, I do remember those remarks.
So,
and I can understand the reason he made them. But if your aim was to get a good result through the referendum, that was the wrong approach then, I thought, and I still think it is today. And we'll know in 12 days or whatever. But if the blame is going to be sheeted around, it really, a lot of it should go right back to the top.
Oh, I'm sure it will if it does fail, as the polling seems to indicate. I think there'll be political consequences both sides for this. And when we're looking at, you had 46% of millennials and 54% of Gen Zers opposed to this. So I think there are going to be some really significant problems for the coalition going forward, particularly in the cities where they failed so badly in 2022 in the federal election. They're not doing enough, in my view, to win those voters back in Sydney and Melbourne, and they're going to rely on really just trying to pick up enough seats in the outer cities of Sydney and Melbourne, and then basically fight against the Nationals for a bit of a slice of regional Australia.
Look, the Liberals had that problem before the referendum was announced.
But they've made it even starker, haven't they? They've made it even starker now. They've actually drawn a line. I mean, Peter, we covered this last week. I mean, Peter Dutton actually said that the Liberal Party is the party of regional Australia, and it simply isn't. It's the party of suburban Australia. When Menzies created it, that was what it was all about. So they've shifted their demographic to a place where there's no certainty that they'll have any sort of support.
Well, that's
particularly regional Australia, where really
all of that predates The Voice.
Well, no, it doesn't. Peter Dutton was making a comment about The Voice when he said that the Liberal Party was the party of regional Australia, which it clearly isn't. And that's the problem they've got. Speaking of absurdity, Jack, Parnell Palm McGuinness in the Sunday Age. Did you see it? She said Albo has spent 300. Albo has spent $347 million. I don't know where she got that figure from, to make Jacinta Price the next PM.
There are a few
know where we
problems
start with that, Jack.
Well, there are a few problems with that. Firstly, she's a member of the National Party, not the Liberal Party.
Yes, that's one.
Secondly, she's in the wrong house.
Yeah, in the Senate, yeah.
And there's only in recorded history, there's only one time a senator has become PM, and that was John Gorton on the death of Harold Holt.
Mm-hmm.
And they promptly shoehorned him into Harold Holt's seat.
They didn't put him in Holt's seat, did they? They put him in. Who was he? Was he the sitting member? Surely not. They bunged him in
Holt's seat.
Kooyong, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Not bad for a bloke from Double Bay.
John Gorton? No, he was a farmer from Kerrang.
Well, he used to hang around Double Bay.
He did, but he was originally, he grew up on a farm in Kerrang and then went off to Geelong Grammar and Oxford from there. But he's a rural Victorian. So
I thought he was a Sydney sider from that time on. Anyway,
but from the time,
yes,
from the
wrong
end of
house, wrong party. What else have we got?
And she never got enough support.
Yeah, it's just an odd thing, and I know it sort of was mocked on Twitter, but it's almost like op-ed editors are saying to contributors, "Can you give me your maddest take?" And we'll run with that. It was simply bizarre in its misunderstanding. I mean, what she would expect to say, as you've highlighted, that Jacinta Price would move into perhaps Solomon. Now, she had a crack at Solomon and lost in 2019. She had a bit of a swing towards her against a sitting member who was then Warren Snowden. So she would have to compete in a seat like Solomon. And then she... for the Liberal Party, not the CLP, and then she would have to basically have the numbers in the party room to knock over any challenger. Bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I thought it was a glib throwaway line suitable for Twitter, not for 1,000 words.
Well, yeah, Twitter actually has picked up on it, and people are saying, yes, Jacinta Price for PM, Jacinta Price for PM. And you go, well, here's why that doesn't work. And of course it doesn't. And you basically, when we look at the polling, Jack, just to cover the voice, the great departure from the yes majority occurred in around the time the coalition, I should say the Liberal Party, or Peter Dutton's leadership of the party, decided to go down the no pathway. You actually see that.
No, I don't. I don't agree with that.
But that's the timing of it.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
The timing has. If you date the start of the fall of the yes support, it dates from when the proposal was made public, and it has fallen at almost exactly the same rate ever since.
I know. What I was saying was that the yes and no bisected at that time.
Yeah, they bisected, but it was already falling. And what that tells me is not that Peter Dutton caused it, but that as people progressively became aware of what was in the voice, they didn't like it. And as more people became aware of what's in the voice, the thing just kept falling. And it's still falling now because more people know what's in it. What that tells me is the problems with what's in the proposal.
Good piece of Troy Bramston this morning, Jack. Not sure if you read it, but I'll just go through it very quickly for our readers. I posted it up on Twitter. I thought it was very, very good. The no camp is led by populist reactionary conservatives, many of whom have been propagating lies and misinformation about the voice, and some have peddled unadulterated racism. We can't take any of that back. That's absolutely taken place. It has been sickening to observe organisations such as CPAC Australia provide a platform for bigotry, and dangerous to see them attack the integrity of the Australian Electoral Commission. That's in regard to the Tix v Crosses. There is no agreed alternative pathway for reconciliation and recognition offered by the no camp. And that's the truth. I mean, there is no way forward on reconciliation beyond this. And that's the problem. You know, people are essentially voting. If they vote no, they're essentially voting for the status quo. And we can all agree, if we can agree on one thing, it is that the status quo isn't working.
Yeah, this is getting back to, it's a very poor argument from Troy Branston. This is getting back to we must do something. This is something. Let's do it. And that's a rubbish argument.
Well, no, that's you're summarising probably the best part of 1,000 words into two brief sentences.
Yep. And it's good that I'm capable of doing it.
But it is not merely symbolic, it is practical too. These are his words. By enshrining an Indigenous advisory body in the Constitution, it means the idea cannot be abolished. Future parliaments and governments must have a formalised body made up of Indigenous Australians, chosen by Indigenous Australians, to provide advice on matters that affect them. It is only advice. Whether or not the advice is followed or rejected will depend on the quality of that advice. The genius of this proposal is that the Parliament, the elected representative body of all Australians, remains supreme, Jack. So It's not as if he's just gone, well, we've got an idea and this is it. The simple fact of the matter is, and I hope people start really thinking about this, the no case, and you've said, they don't have to prove anything, they don't have to show anything, but if the no case gets up, the status quo will continue. And everyone agrees that the status quo is not good enough. Now, I see a lot of people babbling on about, we might legislate and we might do this and we'll get out there and we'll help our Indigenous brothers and sisters. But there's no pathway. There's no pathway.
But the problem that the Voice has got is that the proposal isn't going to be supported by a majority of Australians, nothing like it, in my view. And that's the problem, is not with the Australian people. The problem is with the proposal.
Look, I can certainly accept that there was a failure to bring the Australian people along, and that should have been handled some time ago. But it's actually not Labor's responsibility.
Yes, it is.
Why would it be their responsibility?
Because it's
basically
they're
the responsibility
of
fundamentally of the National Reconciliation Committee or the Council.
No, the government runs this. The government should have run a process where the wider Australian community were consulted, not just 10% of the population, but 100% of the population were consulted. And they didn't do that. And the problem is not with anything else. The problem is the proposal isn't going to be accepted by a majority of the people. And I was even more certain of that watching Q&A last night. Noel Pearson was on there. I'm a great admirer of Noel Pearson, but he looked like an angry loser last night.
Well, I know he would probably be reading the polling. There's also, I sort of came across some tweets there from the fringe, it must be said, where people are suggesting that Noel Pearson and other senior Indigenous figures should be arrested for misuse of public funds, of taxpayer funds. There's a lot of nonsense being done. I took exception to some of this sort of stuff. Malcolm Roberts, who's a senator, and I say that with gritted teeth, he came up with this tweet, a little bit different to what I just proposed, but he's just definitely a fringe dweller. Every Aboriginal I've engaged on, Albanese's voice is strong, full stop, and clear, no, in caps. Every Aboriginal, Jack. Is that correct term?
Yeah, it could be 3, it could be 4, who can tell?
Well, Aboriginal is an adjective, Jack. And these guys, I mean, let's not forget that Pauline Hanson's One Nation, basically she was disendorsed by the Liberal Party for her comments about Aboriginal Australians all the way back in, what are we talking, 1996? And Malcolm Roberts is a fellow traveller. This is one of the things, and I know I got a few likes, etc. for a whole lot of people. The word Aboriginal is an adjective, and when you get these sort of fringe dwellers, because they've been so long denouncing Aboriginal Australians, Indigenous Australians, which is the right term, you can say First Australians, if you like, but Aboriginal is an adjective. It doesn't take a plural, so it's not Aboriginals. The word would be Aborigine. And because they get to that point and go, Aborigine, that sounds a bit racist. So they're actually not even sure how to use the language properly. And I think that's just awful from a senator of this country, but then we wouldn't expect too much from Malcolm Roberts. Just get the language right. I saw this guy, another guy who was talking about Aboriginals, all the Aboriginals that I speak to, and you go, mate, do you call them Aboriginals? Do you do that? And maybe if you listened rather than actually speaking, it might be a little bit different for you. Came across quite a few of those people along the line, and then you look in their timeline and they want Albanese in handcuffs, they want this person arrested, they want Noel Pearson behind bars. I mean, what in the hell? I mean, this is part of the problem with this referendum, is that it has given rise to these fringe-dwelling lunatics with their nonsense that somehow, and they will come away from this thinking they've had a win. That's what really bothers me.
Well, they won't have had a win, but the government certainly won't have it.
Yeah, all right. These people, as followers of the conditional release program, will tell me bother me intensely. Malcolm Roberts.
Yeah, Troy Branson starts his article by saying the people promoting the voice are racist, etc., right? The problem with that approach is that you've got to address the reason why you're losing the thing. And he doesn't. And the reason why you're losing it is because good, decent, ordinary Australians in a majority are going to vote no. And he doesn't address that issue. He doesn't address why they're going to vote no.
All right. Well, the polls are open for most of Australia. I think parts of Australia opened yesterday.
Today in Queensland, yesterday in New South Wales, I think.
No, not with the public holiday. I think New South Wales, Queensland are open to, maybe Victoria opened yesterday, I think. And it might have been Tasmania as well. So the polls are open for pre-polling, and we wait 11 days for the result. We'll know it fairly quickly, Jack. There are no preferences to be counted. It's just a simple yes or no exercise.
So we won't need clever scrutineers in there mounting up that adding up the preferences.
I'm sure there'll be some who'll want to count the X's. Not that there'll be many of those, I wouldn't expect. And I did see some idiot posted on Twitter had scrawled in the name Dan Andrews instead of yes or no. And so that clearly will not be counted. And that takes us to Dan Andrews wandering off into the sunset, Jack. And we know a little bit more about the caucus meeting to select his successor.
Well, that hadn't taken place when we last spoke. It was
Well,
due to happen
yeah,
the
it
next day.
had just happened. Yeah, that's right. So Jacinda Allen is the the left went in hard with Jacinda Allen, who's become the Premier, and Tim Pallas, who's the current Treasurer, and they wanted him as deputy as well. But that seemed to die. That would be in breach of party rules doing that, wouldn't it, Jack?
Yeah, well, that was the problem, and apart from the obvious reason for Dan to go so quickly because of his smoking, that the reason why he went, I will be no longer the Premier or member for Mulgrave at 5 o'clock tomorrow, was to try and bludgeon and bully his way to get both Allen and Tim Pallas as leader and deputy leader, but that fell over because the right stung the right faction.
They dug their heels in a bit.
They dug their heels in and said, "Well, you're breaching the rules because the rules say that we've got to have at least 3 days before nominations for the leader, and we've got to have a whole process that could take a month, and unless you give us the deputy premiership." We'll bung on that blue and the whole thing will collapse in an embarrassing shambles. So they got away with that.
Plenty of swearing.
I'm told that Dan was getting very fruity in the caucus meeting.
Basically said to them, this is from an insider, someone in the meeting, Daniel exploded. His rant was second to none. It was fucking this, fucking that. He basically said to them, you all have the right to aspire to be promoted. You don't have the right to bring divisions into this room. So it's basically, it's back me, but you can't sack me.
It's just a reminder that even in a parliamentary democracy, when you think a parliamentary leader like Dan Andrews has absolute authority, that authority disappears the moment they're no longer the leader because they've got no promises that they can stick to, and their threats are empty.
Right. Their power is gone. Magically, just disappears.
The power is gone. Instantaneously, the power is gone.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, because they can't give you that promotion anymore.
Yeah,
And conversely, they can't hold the threat of sacking you anymore. So, the power just disappears. I did notice
it's all based on bluff. That absolute authority they have is based upon bluff. And if someone's game enough to call it out and win, the power goes away.
It seems to me to be a more sensible approach, the way it ended up anyway. I mean, sensible and no longer in breach of party rules. And it would seem that Jacinda Allen is going to be perhaps more inclusive within the media than Dan was. And it just seems that there might just be a little bit of a let-off. I read some, there were, just an absolute bucket of gallons of ink spread around on op-eds about Dan, including the fact that he had bankrupted near, or sometimes explained as near bankruptcy or just straight out bankruptcy. Michael Kroger described Victoria as being bankrupt. Have you looked at the debt, Jack? Because it's bad, but it's not bankruptcy.
No, he left a few problems behind, and if there was a weakness in the government, it was that he was given too much authority, too much power in his office, and the fact that they've ended up with a deputy from the right faction and a promise to be a more inclusive and open government will improve government in Victoria. Because almost all the things that went wrong, and there were a few that went wrong, there always are things that go wrong in a government, but the things that went wrong because of excessive power in one office.
Yeah, you tend to find that, don't you? When there's unrestrained power, you just don't have that sort of collusion. Not collusion. That's probably not the right word, but that cooperative decisions made that can iron out some of the chinks and some of the kinks and some of the problems there.
Can I just say, that was a failure of the Labor Party. It was the failure of the comrades within the party. The party generally works better than that, but on this occasion it didn't. It allowed you to have too much power. Normally in the Labor Party, things, long experience being a player in there, things are tougher than that. If you get a bit beyond a bit too big for your boot, someone normally knocks you off. And that didn't happen. It probably should have.
Yeah, look, just to explain, just further on that indebtedness and bankruptcy, which is just complete nonsense. The New South Wales and Victorian public debts are running around about the same at the moment. Obviously, New South Wales is a bigger state, so that's not a great thing. And the way things are now that we've had both state budgets being handed down, is that Victoria, without dealing with the amount of debt that it currently has, will surpass New South Wales over the next 2 years. So there is an issue there, and Pallas, or whoever succeeds him, and there's some talk that Tim Pallas will leave the Parliament fairly soon himself, will have to deal with that business, and that's either a tax or a cut exercise.
Yeah.
All right. Well, regardless of what you think of Dan and what's going on in Victoria right now, at least there is a government. Does the Tasmanian government still exist, Jack? I guess it does, maybe just in name only.
Well, the Premier still has the authority granted.
Well, we're not sure, but it hasn't been tested yet.
Yeah, it hasn't been tested yet. It's Tasmania politics is always an odd place. I mean, it's bigger than the ACT, I suppose, but not by much. It's sort of a combination of a state government and a local council. Yeah.
Well, what we have there for listeners who aren't aware of it is explosive text messages appear to show Tasmanian Attorney General Elise Archer attacking her, in quotes, gutless Premier Jeremy Rockliff and his glass jaw, that's another quote, predecessor Peter Gutman, and a female colleague's love life. Now, the leaked text came as the most senior woman in the Tasmanian government and the highest-ranking female Liberal office holder in the country. Whew. Gee whiz, that tells you a fair bit about the Liberal Party at the moment. Faces an independent inquiry into allegations of bullying and belittling behaviour. I had a look at some of those allegations, Jack. They're fairly strong. Anyway, the Australian broke the inquiry and Mr Rockliff confirmed the probe. Then the Attorney General walked out. She was going to resign, but she decided, hang on. She did a little bit of maths, got the coaster out, did a bit of work there, and then decided, hang on, if I sit in the crossbenches, I can roll the government. And now she's threatening to do just that, and that she will support a vote of no confidence in Rockliff. When I think they're sitting now, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they are. I read the text messages that were sort of derogatory of her colleagues in the cabinet, and I couldn't see what the fuss was about. I've certainly heard Labor ministers describe other Labor ministers in far more fruity language than that.
Yeah, the bullying stuff's a bit.
The bullying stuff's a different question.
It is. That's right. Yeah. So yes, look, calling someone having a glass jaw and another one as gutless is probably, it's just part of the political rigour, Jack.
Even in the best government of our lifetime, the Bob Hawke government, you could regularly hear some fairly strong descriptions of cabinet colleagues.
Who puts these? who's silly enough to put these things in a text, Jack?
Yeah, here's the phone. Yeah.
There are a number of and some of them use wicker and they dissolve and they're encrypted and all this sort of stuff. They should take a leaf out of some of the gangsters running around in Sydney and Melbourne at the moment and use a text communication that is encrypted and disappears after a fixed period of time. And there are a number of.
Think they should all have burner phones, mate.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that could come with its own share of problems. So what's going to happen? What's your guess? I mean, it's hard to know just on the ground, but when we look at Tasmanian elections and they use the similar system to the to the way the Senate is elected, it's very, very difficult for Labor to get a majority with their primary vote. Because a lot of it bleeds to the Greens and so forth. So the Greens and Labor have a fair amount of representation, but it would need a major shake-up for Labor to be installed as in majority, possibly with the Greens. But it's very likely that this will end in an election in Tasmania, Jack.
Yeah, quite probably. It's a bit like a schoolyard spat, though, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I just love that the former Attorney General has looked around and gone, oh, no, I'm not going to resign. I'm going to stay here and cause more trouble, and including support for a vote that would almost certainly see the government booted out and having to go and call the governor for a new election.
But they shouldn't have pushed her out because of the text messages. What they should have done was hauled her in and say, "There's a problem in your office. Fix that. Don't give a damn what you say about me behind my back or in front of me, for that matter. And let's get on with it."
Yeah. Well, politics is, after all, a fair bit about personalities too. So you would say Mr. Rockcliffe might have a bit of a glass jaw, although that allegation was made about his predecessor, Jack.
Well, they're going to have to harden up if they're going to play.
Harden up the Liberal Party in Tasmania. Jesus Christ. Anyway, Jack, Simon Holmes at court is backing nuclear power, Jack. Well, not now, but maybe in 2040. What do you think?
He's backing the young fella who was on Q&A last week, the week before. Saying,
I saw him, yeah.
There is look, got to give the kid credit. He absolutely wiped the floor with the government minister. It was poor old Chris Bowen's worst day of his life, I think. When you get out-debated by a 17-year-old on national television.
Let me put it this way, Jack. It's actually the easiest thing in the world to get knocked over by a 17-year-old on a show like Q&A, because he's going to have, that 17-year-old kid is going to have the support of the audience against the Minister of the Crown. So regardless of what's said, he's already starting a mile in front. But go on.
Yeah. Anyway, Chris Bowen, to his credit, was out next day like Comical Ali from the Iraq War, saying it went really well, he was on Twitter next day, so he thought it had gone really well. And that did amuse me. What Simon Holmes at court is saying is there's no justification for a ban on nuclear power in Australia. And he adds that doesn't mean that it's likely that anything will be built, because he doesn't think the technology is ready yet. But he thinks the ban should go away, and the technological aspects of it will sort out whether we use it or not.
Right, yes. And that's a fairly reasonable position.
It's a common sense point of view, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I'm not opposed to nuclear power in principle, and I would have taken that 17-year-old out the back and given him a slapping and then put him back in his chair and just torn him apart and become the worst person in Australia in doing so. But we've talked about why this doesn't work. And just a reminder to listeners, it was the Howard government that banned nuclear power in Australia, and that was done in 1998. But what the coalition has now gone for all these small modular reactors that really, at this stage, don't look much more than really just architect's drawings. There are, I think from memory, there is a small modular reactor on board a ship in Russia in Arctic Russia. And I think there is one being built, and I think Bill Gates has something to do with it, somewhere up in Montana, possibly, certainly up in the northwest of the United States. And other than that, they're pretty thin on the ground, these small modular reactors. And you just think, mate, that's not really a basis for any sort of government or, well, opposition policy. But, yeah, the ban, we can talk about it. No one's going to, the real politic of this is that no one's going to go anywhere near this anytime soon. Albanese, certainly not on his to-do list.
No, but I think getting rid of the ban would be a good idea.
Okay, well, we do produce a lot of uranium here, but we've gone through, and we don't need to go through it. Why the difficulty is essentially with even a small modular reactor is you're going to need water, and water can be a bit hard to come by in Australia. I think it's going to be a bit hard to come by later on in this year. Over to the United States now, Jack. Dianne Feinstein passed away, and it gave rise to a very strange proposition that Meghan Markle might replace her, Jack. Yeah,
I thought that was brilliant. And look, do you think perhaps that story might have been planted by Meghan Markle?
My first thought of this was, oh, no, this is a media hit job. That's what I thought. That's what I honestly thought. Maybe it's a PR, a mob working overtime.
That's what it looked like to me.
I actually thought it was a complete media, non-story. They just sort of made it up.
I thought it was, but she's sort of desperate to get a bit of relevance. So.
What have we got here? Sorry, go on.
The governor has appointed the head of Emily's List. Her name is LaFonce Butler.
LaFonza Butler, yes.
LaFonda Butler to be the senator for the next 13 months.
Yes.
In which, but Feinstein's seat, in the United States, you come up for re-election every second time. So,
yes.
On this occasion, it's Feinstein's seat that comes up for re-election, and there is some vigorous campaigning going on to replace Feinstein from the time that she announced that she was going to no longer be the senator from the end of next year. Adam Schiff, the congressman from California, and Barbara Lee, another congressperson from California, are the two leading candidates. And the question was, Barbara Lee had the expectation that Newsom would nominate her to fill the short-term position, and he declined to do so, I think because he didn't want to be seen to be putting his thumb on the scales for the battle against Adam Schiff.
Yes, it would seem like Gavin Newsom has moved fairly quickly to deal with it, Jack. We'll get back to San Francisco in a moment, but we did see...
amusingly, the incoming senator lives in Maryland.
Okay. Well, he's not a California Democrat, Jack. Yeah, that's got to be a bonus. We did see the Trumpster in the courts yesterday while we were all having lovely public holidays, you and me both, and the Donald was there. And I did see someone had painted an image of him, one of those court artists' illustrations with Jesus next to him, painted in little Jesus, because how could he have got this far without the help of someone really significant? How's that all looking? $250 million potential loss for him, and the loss of the ability to trade in the state of New York, Jack.
Yeah, I just don't think this will stand up on appeal.
So you think he may lose, but then he'll get it up. He'll wander away.
Yeah,
I did see that the judge had valued, and this has been a contentious point. The judge had valued, or someone in his office had valued Mar-a-Lago at $18 million, Jack. Seems a little light, although the Trumpster reckons it's worth $1.5 billion. It's probably a little heavy.
Which that might be a little high.
Little heavy. Yeah, somewhere in the middle. Somewhere in the middle there.
I don't think the Court of Appeal are going to agree that inflating the values of your properties in order to get loans is an offence that deserves this sort of punishment, especially in a city like New York. Everyone would be out of business if that was the case. Trump just might be the most egregious at that, but it's widespread. And I think there's no political cost for him either.
Rolling Stone, just to add, has just weighed in with a suggestion that there may be another indictment, Jack, this time in Arizona, in regard to electoral fraud that went on into 2022 from the Trump camp, allegedly.
They are determined to make him the nominee, aren't they?
Well, the latest bit of polling, not much polling. There hasn't been any polling on The Voice, by the way. We should have said that outset. But latest bit of polling that I looked at was a YouGov poll that had Biden ahead by 5. But that's going back and forth all the time. And we're just going to have to see how the Trumpster gets on in these indictments, the two significant ones in March next year. Meanwhile, Jack, Elon Musk got all over this, didn't he? This is we're now going into Europe, and the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has written to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, telling him she learned with astonishment, and that's a quote, of a German government initiative to finance migrant charity groups operating in the Mediterranean. And this was the subject of Elon Musk's tweets. He's in a bit of strife over some of that tweeting, Jack. Suggesting that, I wondered if the German people know about this, and then started promoting more right-wing ideas and suggesting it'd be a good thing if the ADF was elected. The far-right ADF was re-elected in Germany. What could possibly go wrong there? And the German Foreign Office replied to Elon Musk in regard to this matter by saying these initiatives save lives. And that was where it ended. But in the meantime, the Italians are a little bit upset because they're bearing the brunt of really significant numbers coming onto their shores at the moment.
They are, and they're not happy about it.
They're not very happy at all. So we've got arrivals this year in Italy at 133,000, which is almost twice that of the same period last year, Jack.
And just so we're clear, what they're not happy about is that there are, I think, 8 or 9, possibly 10 ships in the Mediterranean that are chartered by German-funded NGOs, in fact, partly funded by the German government, that are basically sailing over to the shores of Tripoli so that people can get on a boat, go a short little way. They get picked up by the NGO ships and dropped at Lampedusa or Bari or one of the ports in the south of Italy. That effectively makes those NGOs part of the people smuggling chain, in my view, and the Italians are quite rightly unhappy.
Well, I would need to see some evidence that they were sailing all the way to Tripoli, Jack.
Most of the way.
Well, I'll need to see some evidence about that, because that would support your claim. But basically, as it stands, as I said before, the German Foreign Ministry said it is a legal, humanitarian and moral duty to rescue people at sea, which is true.
Yeah, and the Italians will be very, very quickly saying, well, okay, you can save their lives, pick them up, and you can take them to Germany.
Well, they have undertaken to do. They're not doing that, of course, but they did undertake to and did so successfully, Jack. I remember you running around like Chicken Little. Roofs were going to collapse and what have you when they agreed to take on a million Syrian.
And it hasn't gone at all well.
It hasn't gone badly, Jack. I mean, it hadn't gone badly as you suggested it was going to. You were talking about fabric of society being rent asunder. Maybe one of the consequences of it is that we do have this life breathed into the extreme right in Germany. That might be one of the consequences of it. But overall, the sort of social calamities that were forecast at the time just haven't been. They just haven't come to pass.
Well, I'm not sure the calamities, but it's not a good situation.
Well, anyway, it certainly hasn't brought with it any. Basically, there were people around. I'm not suggesting it was you. I mean, I do. You were a bit of a doomsday scroller at that time, but there are others who were suggesting that basically Germany would collapse, Europe would collapse. This is all part of this entire Islamification of Europe argument, Jack. But none of that sort of stuff has come to pass. Meanwhile, in France, Jack.
No, if you want to know what precisely I said was you can't take 1 million people into a country like Germany when you have not yet assimilated or integrated the Turkish guest workers who arrived after the war. The Germans and the French have no understanding at all of how to make multiculturalism work.
I do remember you making that point, but there are other things that were suggested by other commentators that were, that basically the roof was going to come in, the sky was going to fall. And those things haven't happened. And really, given what we understand about Syria, first thing is that the Germans played the diplomacy terribly, terribly wrong with Russia, who were propelling and supporting the awful Assad regime in Syria. And I guess we could also throw in that Barack Obama drew the do not cross line, and then the Syrians and the Russians did, and nothing happened. Meanwhile, in France, Jack, 41% of the French population is in favour of a proposal to limit everyone to 4 flights in their entire life. And 59% of the 18 to 24-year-old demographic agree with that. 2 return flights. That's enough, isn't it, for anyone? Yeah.
Well, I'm a bit of a non-flyer these days, so it doesn't really affect me.
Flew for the first time about 3 weeks ago.
A mate calls me the Greta Thunberg of Hong Kong. I don't fly anywhere.
It does seem a bit odd that anyone could be limited to this. And it's going to, I suppose we have the technology to get around it, Jack, Zoom calls and what have you, FaceTimes and all that sort of stuff. This is something that would never be countenanced. But it's an interesting poll, isn't it? I think it's very interesting to say what young people, because, 18 to 24-year-olds, I presume, don't fly as much as their older counterparts might.
Gee, I don't know. All the 18 to 24-year-olds I know are always flying somewhere.
18 to 24 is probably a bit young. I think when you're getting into that later 20s, early 30s. But, fair enough. 18 to 24-year-olds, they just want to travel. But they might have to do it by bus, Jack.
That's a problem if you're from Australia, really, isn't it?
It is a bit of a problem. You're going to need something that's going to be fairly seaworthy. Meanwhile, the BBC has come up with new rules for social media use for its presenters, commentators, workers, employees, etc. Flagship presenters like Gary Lineker, who was bounced out of the BBC or suspended for a week. I think it was only about a week, wasn't it?
One match, I think.
Yeah, it was uproar, and they let him back on. And as usual, the BBC didn't quite know what to do. But they've come up with a new policy now. And they say, look, just go nuts. You are free to express opinions about the issues that matter to you, including issues that may be the subject of public and political debate. Again, don't have a problem with any of this.
No, nor do I. In fact, I whacked in a piece on our document from a commentator in England saying that at first she thought this is a terrible idea, and now she thinks it's a good idea because at least then we know what people think. This would work really well at the ABC, and it would solve some of the Twitter problems that some of the lunatic left have with Twitter, of imagining that everybody at the ABC has turned into a pro-Liberal and National Party stooge.
There is a sense too from, Lineker's a soccer caller, and he is a guy with a profound social conscience and a man who's done a lot of work with refugees in particular. But you would find most journalists are not keen, particularly political journalists, are not keen to have it known who they support or their political philosophies made so public as a Twitter forum or something like that. And so I think a lot of people will be reluctant to do it. But I think it's a sensible move. There is a sense of restraint on particularly ABC and BBC journalists about actually who and what they believe, and maybe those are personal things. But I think when you get to someone who wants to be outspoken, big deal. Certainly shouldn't see them thrown off air, unless you come up with something that was a bit fruity, Jack.
Yeah. Well, I quite enjoy looking at the Twitter feeds of the ABC pundits in Australia because, with a few notable exceptions, your pal Lee Sales, most of the rest of them seem to have exactly the same view on almost everything.
Yeah, there's a bit of that going on. I suspect it's all pretty harmless until it starts getting into news reporting, and that's when it's a bit of a problem, Jack. I think, and that goes for all media organisations when they're reporting on when you are looking at straight reports of any matter that arises in Australia. That's the way it should be written, and people can op-ed around that as much as they like.
Yeah. Part of the problem with that is that there's a little bit of a blurring of the line of those two things, particularly on radio and television. In the newspaper, it's relatively straightforward because you have your reporting section and you have your op-ed section. That distinction is a little more blurry when you're on television or on the radio.
It is a bit, yeah, that's right. And look, we do have these issues that arise through media. Sometimes it's impossible to tell what's advertising and what's not.
Yes.
Those sorts of things. And they should be clearly marked. And opinion should be clearly marked as well.
Whereas in the Australian, you have the op-ed page, so you know what you're reading.
There's a big O, and then there's a big P, and then there's an I, etc. after it. And if you don't read that, I'm afraid you're a bit stupid.
That distinction just isn't quite so clear with the television and the radio.
It's not, and sometimes it needs to be said. This is comment. The UK, Jack, also going down a similar path to Australian classrooms. Mobiles are to be.
I hadn't been aware this had happened in Australia, and I know it from the UK.
Well, Dictator Dan snuck it in during the pandemic, mate. They have been banned in the state system, and I'm not quite sure how it works with the independent schools, but certainly in the state system, the ban has been in place in Victoria since 2021. I think WA and Tas pretty much at the same time. New South Wales Min's government has brought in something which will kick in in term 4, so late this year. Mobiles to be banned in classrooms, and I think we're a little bit ahead here. One of the things I wanted to talk about with that, Jack, is that we're going to take phones off kids, and we all, as crusty old white men, we all think that's a terrific idea. These kids should be off their screens for a while. Then I started looking at the number of offences that occur to people, adults, driving their cars who use their phones, not hands-free. $60 million worth of fines extracted from drivers last year. So we're actually saying to kids, get rid of your mobiles, and I think that's quite sensible while you're in a classroom, and leave them. There'll be little lockers, and everyone's got this set up right now. But as adults, we can't seem to let our phones go at all.
No, we can't. And it's as much as the kids, it's the adults who want their school kids to have phones so they can be contactable. Personally, I don't think I would have appreciated that when I was a school kid. I didn't necessarily want to know. I want my parents to know exactly what I was doing and where I was at all times.
Yeah.
And I was away at boarding school, and I didn't want the boarding school to know where I was and what I was up to at all times. So
I have seen a few TikToks of students in American high schools where they're just flipping through the phone while the teacher speaks. And that's not good. But at the same time, it would seem that just a fantastic piece of adult hypocrisy, Jack. We're running around causing all sorts of mayhem on the roads because we can't let a phone call go without responding to it. We can't let a text go.
Well, being a more green person than yourself and being more careful of my carbon footprint and not being a driver of cars, that's not a problem for me. But generally speaking, I won't answer the phone in a taxi because
it's rude, isn't it? It's just rude.
And you also lose them. You take it out of your pocket.
Yeah,
and,
good point.
And
practical stuff. I will take a phone call on a train. But I'll just simply say, listen, I'm just on a train, can I call you back? I'd consider that to be an incredibly rude thing to do where people have very loud, voluble conversations in a public space like a train carriage. I think that is just awful. So maybe we should have a few government people say, right, give us your phone. Well, you can get it back when the train ride's over. Meanwhile, Jack, the Canadians basically are looking at expanding online censorship schemes, or announcing that all online streaming services that offer podcasts, well, that's us, Jack, must formally register with the government to permit regulatory controls. Whew, that sounds dark.
Canada's becoming the least liberal democracy in the world.
Oh, it's got some challenges there, but yes, it may well be. This sort of stuff is just clearly overreach. And is it just that they don't know what they're doing? Are they looking at things like Spotify and saying, well, you've got to register with us, rather than meek, mild little players like you and me, Jack?
Hard to know. But it's hard to find a reasonable justification for this. I can't find one.
Yeah, so it's called the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC, on May 12 this year, launched its first public consultations after thoroughly examining all the evidence on the public record, including over 200 interventions. The CRTC is issuing its first two decisions. First, it's setting out which online streaming services need to provide information about their activities in Canada. Second, the CRTC is setting conditions for online streaming services to operate in Canada. These conditions take effect today, and that's just as we record this last week. Require certain online streaming services to provide the CRTC with information related to their content and subscribership. That's a bit much. The decision also requires those services to make content available in a way that is not tied to a specific mobile or internet service. And a third consultation is ongoing, Jack.
Yeah. As I said, I can't find a justification for doing this apart from government wanting to interfere with what people say to each other.
All right. Yeah, I don't like the sound of it too much either myself. But look, we had a huge weekend of sport here, Jack, in Australia. First off, the AFL Grand Final, traditional Saturday afternoon, fantastic game of football, one of the best games of football I've seen, full stop, let alone Grand Finals. In the end, Collingwood were just a bit harder for a little bit longer, and they won the game by 4 points. Wonderful showcase for the game, and congratulations to the Collingwood Football Club, who have actually very quietly gone about a cultural change, only for the better, and that's been led essentially by their coach, who is, as we discussed on WhatsApp over the weekend, the coach of the year, in my opinion.
Well, it was a coaching triumph. I think, to be fair, some of the culture change started before Bucks left, but it's a coaching triumph because really Brisbane a considerably more talented team than Collingwood.
On paper, yeah. On an on-paper assessment, you look at them, and this I thought they could win even late into the game because they just seem to be able to kick their goals a little bit easier, and that's because of that talent.
Well, they had 5 or 6 blokes out there who kicked 20 more goals a year. Collingwood had 3, which makes a difference.
Yeah.
But Collingwood, they don't have a key forward at all, really. They didn't have one playing. They had a bloke playing, a defender playing a defensive role in Harris Andrews. They don't have an A-grade ruckman. And
that really didn't work. I'd suggest to you that there's a question I want to put to you, and this is the start of it, that wasn't Collingwood's best 23.
No.
By some margin, there'd be 3 or 4 blokes that were unhappy that missed out, and it was really quite sad to see one of the Collingwood players who missed through injury, former
Taylor Adams.
Yeah, Taylor Adams, former GWS Giant player, sobbing openly on the ground afterwards. Do we need, and why hasn't this been done already, do we need to basically award the squad with medals?
Wayne Carey was talking about this yesterday or the day before, and he said, look, maybe it's not if you play one game for the season, but once you get to a certain number of games, everybody in the squad should get a medal because you don't win it without the squad.
Well, that's what they do in the basketball at the top level in the US, Jack. The squad gets the medal, not just those players and substitutes. So I think it's something that the AFL definitely needs to look at. It wasn't,
but certainly a coaching triumph for Fly McRae and his mob, because there's always something magic about watching the least talented, the lesser talented team manage to get a win.
I did see some good photos of the Collingwood coach, Craig McRae. Basically, he was there to, I think it would have been a Sunday morning fairly early, possibly a Monday, but fairly early, and there he was for the Brisbane Lions' 20th anniversary of their 2003 premiership, and there was Vossi and Lee Matthews and all the gang, and there he was. And
Sunday at some stage it was. I saw an interview with John O'Brien about it, and he said, Lepich and McRae arrived, and it was like Apollo Creed being carried into the ring. They got such a huge reception when they walked
Well, Justin Lepich has been an assistant coach at Richmond and Collingwood, so he's well used to winning premierships by now. Done it, and I believe one of those really rock solid people.
He had a short and unhappy period as coach of the Lions himself.
That's right. Yeah, when they were on the down. I think McRae's done a wonderful job. I think the captain did a wonderful job. Showed immense on-field leadership. Darcy Moore and Collingwood, there's no doubt, weren't the most talented side in the competition, but got the best out of them.
They were the best
team.
Yeah, the best team in the competition without having. I might say I saw the best last quarter from the former captain, Pendle's, the best last quarter of grand final football I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's been pretty quiet for Pendlebury. For him in the first 3 quarters, but I think he had 11 in the last one. Really, just not so much picked him up and put him on his shoulder, but really just made that significant contribution. Do you think he'll play on?
Yes, I think he will. He's going well enough. I think he will.
He's certainly going well enough to get a game, isn't he?
He and Sidebottom both still going well enough.
Now, we do apologise. A little bit of construction noise in the background there, Jack. What have we got? It seems like they're rolling stuff around.
No. They're
rolling billiard balls on your floor.
I think it's one flat above us or 2 flats above us, and they're jackhammering out some existing walls.
No, yeah, we do apologise for that. But
Unexpectedly, I might add.
We'll keep going. It's the first of our recordings since Australia. Well, good states in Australia brought in daylight saving. So we're a little bit delayed. We might have to get you out of bed a bit earlier next week, mate. But the NRL. Not satisfied about the AFL with a great grand final. The NRL came up with something spectacular as well, and that was, gee, it looked. I was texting a mate who's a Broncos fan and saying, mate, he's also Collingwood barrack, and he said, mate, you got the double because they just looked like they were going to roll all over them. And then Nathan Cleary stepped up.
I watched the second half with an American mate who just arrived back from 4 months over there, and he said, can we have a beer and watch this NRL stuff? I said, yeah. So I went down, and with 20 minutes to go, he says, it's all over, isn't it? I said, oh, no. They're capable of winning from here, but they're going to have to play really well. And they did.
Yeah, look, they certainly did. And we've got a little message from our good mate Ray, baseman Jack, and he says that Adam Reynolds, I don't know whether I want to read this, it's putting a lot on Adam Reynolds, who unfortunately has lost 2 grand finals to the Panthers, once as a South player and the second one as a Bronco. He said he handed the grand final to the Panthers. Virtually every time he did a short kick-off, the Panthers scored points. Their first try from a short kick-off that in the end cost the Broncos the premiership. The ball bounced in favour of the Panthers and a soft try resulted. Many more points were to come from this failed tactic. Territorial advantage is everything when 2 grand final teams are evenly matched. And at every opportunity, the Broncos should have booted the ball into Penrith's half far and as often as possible. With a 24-8 lead, the Broncos should have pissed this in. Great to see the trophy in New South Wales, says Baseman. I think that's a bit harsh.
I don't know. I don't normally follow the in-match betting, but I heard this story and I've checked that it's true. With 20 minutes to go, the betting for the Clive Churchill medal had Nathan Cleary at $50.
Wow.
And he said yesterday, when someone asked him, was that the best 20 minutes of rugby league you played? And he says, yeah, maybe, but the 20 minutes before was about the worst I've played. I think in that period, the 20-year-old fullback from Queensland picked out who we would run out in defence and chose Nathan Cleary and stepped him, which you don't normally see. So 50 to 1, you could have got Nathan Cleary for the Churchill with 20 minutes to go.
20 minutes to go, and then there was the 40-20. There was he basically try assists. I think probably 3 try assists and scored one himself.
And a try.
Scored the sealer. An absolutely marvellous game from him. And the Panthers, we've got the three-peat. I don't know why we call it a three-peat, not a hat-trick, Jack. What, can you understand that? Why do we call it a three-peat?
No, it's American. like the AFL people, commentators talking about people kicking something from downtown. I just can't have it.
Can't have it. Or the big dance. Do we have the big dance?
Yeah, no, can't have that.
Enough
either.
of that. Can't have it. Can't have any of that.
Well, I've been a real rugby league fan for about the same time you have, since the early 90s when we started to watch it. So in my pantheon of great players, seen a lot of great players in that time, but Joey Johns for me was always just a little bit above because he was playing a different game to everybody around him. He was playing chess, not drafts. But Nathan Cleary's up there with Joey Johns.
Isn't he? I mean, he's almost moved from champion to legend. I think that might have been what happened on Sunday. Wonderful grand final. I'm just going to make...
Now, just one thing. I noticed we stayed around and had a couple of extra beers, and we were watching the presentations, and about half of the Penrith players were walking up with these wreaths all around.
Lays. It's a lay.
Oh, I thought personally, I thought it might have
You
been
might have been a
Panther.
bit boozed by that stage, Jack.
I thought it might have been Panther Pride Week or something, and they were coming out of Skye or something.
No, these are lays, and as you know, and I'm sure our listeners do, lays have particular significance throughout the Pacific. The lays with the little lollies on them that they were wearing, little ornaments and little lollies, that's a lay that is a celebration lay. There you
Okay.
go.
So how come only some of the players had them?
I believe that they were made for them. It wasn't made by the club. It was made by supporters.
Okay.
So a lot of Islander supporters out that way. It's given Western Sydney a real boost. They are a very heavy hitters now in the NRL. I'm just going to ask you a question, Jack, and this is something I've thought about for a long time. When NRL is good or rugby league is good, it's just about the best game to watch, isn't it? When it's a real cracker. And compare that to a real cracker in the AFL, I reckon NRL just shades it.
I'm probably still a bit too prejudiced with the AFL. Certainly, NRL is made for television. It's played on a rectangular field, and nearly all the action takes place across the advantage line, so it's easy to film. AFL's awfully hard to explain on television to people who haven't seen it live because they insist upon doing too much close-up work and you can't see what's happening and why. That's really easy to see on an NRL game. So as a television game, a great NRL game is better.
Yep, okay, tend to agree with that. I just seen a few grand finals over the journey and just thought when the NRL is a good game, or rugby league is a good game, it's just about perfect.
It's fantastic. The AFL could fix some of these problems with the television by a bit better direction on the broadcast.
I think I thought the umpires did well in the AFL grand final, Jack, but I still think that we're veering off into rugby union territory here by the complexity of rules. And I think it's just becoming a more and more difficult game to umpire as we go, with umpires having to go through a checklist of about a dozen things before they play a hole in the ball free kick. For example, there's so much grey area around all of that these days. We need to make that game a little bit simpler. You don't want to be like I find myself with some of my rugby mates watching the game, and they've played it, and they don't know what's going on. The ref blows the whistle, and they don't have a clue. And if they don't have a clue, I don't have a clue.
Yeah, I've sat there next to a former Australian captain at the old Sydney Football Stadium watching a game, and he would say the same thing. Oh, mate, no idea.
No idea what's going on there. Yeah. So look, and while we get into it, Australia's the Wallabies are still alive, but Portugal would have
they're on
to
life
be.
support. They're on life support.
Well, didn't the Georgians lead Fiji at halftime? I think they did.
They did.
And there might have been just a bit of a whisper. Of course, Australia got out and got the bonus point against. It was Portugal, wasn't it? Not Georgia.
It was Portugal, and I think Fiji plays Portugal in the game that will determine that Australia come home.
And Eddie Jones has been he suggested that he could give the Fijian squad his credit card, and they get on the carver and turn up before the game. It might just save his job. So highly unlikely. You'd probably put that about 50-1, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Somewhere like that. Cricket World Cup starting. Australia played a bit of a knockabout game, rain affected against the Dutch there, and Mitchell Starc picked up a hat-trick. In an abbreviated form of the game. What chance do you give Australia in this, Jack? India, obviously, hot favourites.
I think the locals will win, won't they? I see that the first match is England-New Zealand on Thursday, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it starts this week, that's right. Most of it.
And runs through to about the 19th of October.
Here. Sorry, Jack.
And runs through to, I think the final's about the 19th of October or something, isn't it? Or is it further
away?
Oh,
no, it'll be a little bit later than that, I would think. But we'll pull that up. You have a crack at that.
19th of November. Sorry,
yeah. It's good. It's a 6-week tournament, I think. So it's Australia not without a chance. They've had some issues with the squad. Smith and Cummins are now back. with the squad, both overcoming some injuries sustained during the Ashes campaign. Marnus Labuschagne wasn't in the squad, but now he's sort of a key member. It's kind of just how well. I think the real key role will be played by Mitch Marsh. He will either open the batting or bat at 3, and if he has a blinder, they'll go very well, very, very well. Because I've never seen anyone hit the ball as hard as Mitchell Marsh. Consistently hit the ball harder. All right, what do you like in the racing, Jack? I've been looking at it at all.
One that I suggested a couple of weeks ago, Just Fine, won in very nice style at Randwick on Saturday. Amelia's Jewels going okay. The weights are out, and the betting is all for the Melbourne Cup and for the Cox Plate and the Caulfield Cup, and the betting is all with the nearly all with the imports who we haven't seen much of yet. So.
Well, none of them had a run, so, and some of them won't have a run before the Cup. That's what makes it difficult.
No, they won't. And I've had a look at their past records in the UK and France, etc. And really, the horses that come over here and succeed are pretty much B graders back in the UK and France and Ireland. It just goes to show that our sprinters are world class, but our middle distance and staying horses are just a little bit weaker than they are.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. That's absolutely right. And historically, and now since we have this large influx of horses from overseas, it's the difficulty with the Melbourne Cup is that very few of these horses will have raced in as large a field. So that's one thing. So a horse that won't panic when it's in a field of 22, 24, and that's the thing. If they can just get through the going, because a lot of staying races in Europe in particular are 3 and 4 miles.
Yeah, and what tends to succeed is not the 3 or 4 mile horses; it's the fast hurdlers. Who come over here and succeed.
Yeah.
And there was a time when Australians used to go to New Zealand and buy staying horses, but these days they go to Europe.
Yeah. Look, still, if you're looking for something in a Melbourne Cup day, folks, and we'll help you out a little bit before that. But if there's any sort of soft going, then have a look at some of the Kiwis. If there's the Kiwi in the field, always not a bad go. All right, Jack, take us out with something stupid.
I don't know whether you saw this. Thank you, Joe Aston, for putting this up on Twitter. It was I think it's the Estimates Committee, and the General Counsel of Qantas, who I won't name just because it would embarrass him, was sitting in the chair, and it looked to me he was sitting beside Vanessa Hudson and Richard Goyder, the Chief Executive and the Chairman, respectively, of Qantas, and he piped up. First of all, he wasn't wearing a tie, and really,
lawyers.
In the old days, a judge would say, "I can't see you, Mr. Oyster," if you weren't properly attired. But he piped his head up and said, "Look."
To be fair, it's just the Senate, and I think Ralph Babbitt was sitting in the middle there. So we're not talking about an illustrious group of people. But anyway,
it's not the individual; it's the title you've got to respect. Anyway, so he pipes up and says, "Look, at 6:30, I think it was on a Friday night. The last flight to Sydney leaves in 35 minutes." And the implication being, "I want to be on it." And he was quickly shot down by, I can't think who was chairing it. She was very good. And she gave him a nice old serve and said, "Look, we're deciding this and we'll be sitting on." But of course,
look, if you're General Counsel of Qantas, you could just ring him up and say, "Look, can you just pull that plane for an hour?"
Yeah. And because Joe Aston posted this on Twitter, the best comment, there were lots of great responses, but the best one came from Richard Callender, the racing journalist, son of Kenny Callender.
Oh yeah,
and Richard's comment was, "Oh, look, you're flying Qantas, mate. it'll be 2 hours late.
It'll be late. It'll be late anyway. Yeah. No, fair enough. I think that it's not estimates, by the way. I think this is this Senate inquiry into the allegations of fairly soft treatment for Qantas.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Rather than estimates. They wouldn't have to respond to estimates, of course, because they're not technically recipients of federal funds. But anyway, Jack, thank you so much for your time. Today we got through a lot of stuff, particularly around the voice. I don't think you and I will see eye to eye on it ever, but that's okay. But, of course, listeners, get out there and make your views known. You can get along and save yourself a bit of time. You get along now, today, and any time thereafter until about 5 o'clock it might be 6 o'clock on the 14th, Saturday the 14th of October, Jack.
About 15 minutes past 6, we'll know.
Well, I must tell that story about how Pat Shield failed to vote for himself. Jack got on the booze and wandered up past the ballot box, but they'd already shut down. But and he was on the ticket in Wentworth. But never mind, that's another story for another time. Thank you, listeners, for your time. We threw in Ray's silliness on why there's always got to be someone to blame rather than someone to praise in the NRL Grand Final, but we do like to hear from you too, so drop us a line if you can. You can get me on at Jack the Insider, on Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter, and my DMs are always open. Or Jack, you can hit him up, Hong Kong Jack, you can hit him up on Substack. Give it to me, Jack.
HongKongJack.substack.com.
I'll remember that one day. And so we thank you, and we'll look forward to chatting to you next week when we'll have a little less sport, probably.
Yeah.